Hey YouTube, Dr. Jones here, and I'll be taking a quick break from all the band stuff to give you a little movie review. Today we'll be taking a look at Rogue One, a Star Wars story. It's one of the most, if not the most, anticipated films of the year, and early reports are indicating that it delivers on many fronts. The film currently has a rating of 84% fresh on RottenTomatoes.com and managed to pull in $155 million in its opening weekend, well above predictions. Jeremy Jahns rated it as awesome-tacular, while Richard Brody at The New Yorker didn't seem to like the film at all. I'll leave the links for those reviews so you can check them out for yourself. I got a chance to check it out, and I had a really good time. From the characters to the visuals, music, scope, and action sequences, this film really gave me my money's worth. So let there be no doubt, this film was great, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. For the first part of this review, we won't do any spoilers. We'll go over what you need to know before seeing the film and how I felt about it overall. Somewhere in the middle, we'll take a look at what a few of the critics have been saying about it, and then I'll finish up the last part with a spoiler-heavy, in-depth account on what I liked and didn't like. So if you haven't seen it yet and don't want your experience spoiled, you can watch the first half of this review and then check back on the second half once you've seen it. So here we go. The very first thing that you need to know about this film is where it falls among all the other Star Wars movies, commonly referred to as the saga films. With last year's release of Episode 7, The Force Awakens, a lot of people might be confused and think that this is a sequel to that movie. In fact, this is actually a prequel to the very first Star Wars film, A New Hope, which came out in 1977. So let's break it down. The Star Wars films as we know them actually started with Episode 4, A New Hope. That was followed by Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. This is what is referred to as the original trilogy. We would not see any new Star Wars films until 1999 with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Then came Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. This is known as the prequel trilogy. So, jump ahead to 2015, and Episode 7, The Force Awakens, marks the start of what will be a 3-episode sequel trilogy. We'll get Episode 8 in 2017, and Episode 9 in 2019. So where does Rogue One fit into all of this? Let's take a look at the opening of the very first Star Wars film. This film focuses specifically on these two paragraphs, especially the part about rebel spies stealing the plans to the Death Star. As we know in Episode 4, those plans are eventually used to find the weakness and blow it up. Alright, so boom. Rogue One centers on the life of Jyn Erso and her efforts to track down her father, Galen Erso, who is a brilliant scientist, the one responsible for designing the Death Star's planet-killing super laser. Originally, Galen's research focused on the use of kyber crystals to supply energy to those in need. Kyber crystals are able to take raw energy and amplify it, and were used in the construction of a Jedi's lightsaber. This made them hard to find and even harder to study, but Galen was the only one who was able to find the way. This attracts the attention of Orson Krennic, Galen's buddy from back in the day who now works for the Empire. Galen only wants his research to be used for peaceful purposes, but Krennic and the Empire have other plans. At the beginning of the film, Galen, his wife Lyra, and daughter Jyn, who was a little girl at the time, they've all gone into hiding, but Krennic eventually catches up with them. Some foul stuff goes down, Jyn is on the run, and Galen is taken into custody and forced to work on his research and make it into a weapon. Jyn is taken in by Galen's longtime friend Saw Gerrera, but by the time we jump forward to the present day, Jyn has been on the run for the past 15 years. Even though she's been forced into working in the labor camp, she's rescued by Captain Cassian Andor and his droid sidekick, K2SO. Along the way, they meet up with Chirrut Imwe, a blind but force-sensitive monk, his protector Baze Malbus, and Bodhi Rook, who is a former cargo pilot for the Empire who then defects in order to help the rebels. After finding out what the Death Star can really do, it's up to the rebels to find Galen Erso and see if there's a way to defeat the battle station before it's too late. We eventually find out that Galen designed the plans for the Death Star, and Rogue One then becomes a story all about how the rebels get those plans. The film stars Felicity Jones as Jyn, Diego Luna as Cassian, Ben Mendelsohn as Krennic, Riz Ahmed as Bodhi, Donnie Yen as Chirrut, Zhang Wen as Baze, Mads Mikkelsen as Galen, Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera, and Alan Tudyk doing motion capture as K2SO. The film is directed by Gareth Edwards, who recently directed the Godzilla reboot, and production is headed up by Kathleen Kennedy, president of Lucasfilm. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about some non-spoiler reviews. First, the acting was pretty solid in this film. Mads Mikkelsen does a great job of playing Galen, who will do everything he can to protect his daughter, even if that means working for the bad guys. But we'll talk about more about this in the spoiler section. Another noteworthy performance comes from Ben Mendelsohn. The way he plays Krennic shows you just how conniving and selfish a lot of the Imperial officers are. Many of them are willing to throw each other under the bus in order to move ahead in life, and Mendelsohn pulls this off skillfully. He and another character basically throw shade at each other throughout the film, and this interplay between these two characters really shows you a lot about how the Empire runs on the inside. However, the two characters that really stand out are Chirrut and K2SO. Chirrut is just badass. Seeing him in action, you can't help but root for him. He's that spiritual monk that would rather be all cool and calm, but can still crank it up to 11 and lay some smack down when needed. K2SO, on the other hand, is sarcastic, cynical, witty, and funny. Alan Tudyk played this role via motion capture, thus making the effort that much more noteworthy. Tudyk has played mocap roles before, and many of us will remember him as Sonny from iRobot and Wash from Firefly and Serenity. Both these actors really nail their roles and will likely be audience favorites throughout this film's release. As far as the music goes, I have mixed feelings. This is the first Star Wars film to not be scored by John Williams, and while it still sounds like Star Wars, it's missing a lot of that John Williams magic that made A New Hope so memorable. Rogue One is scored by Michael Giacchino, who has an extensive resume to his name. Among his body of work, some of his most notable efforts include the Star Trek reboot films, the television series Lost and Alias, the Medal of Honor video game series, The Incredibles, for which he won 2 Grammys, and Up, which netted him an Academy Award for Best Original Score. While he does a great job of weaving in many familiar motifs and themes that we commonly associate with Star Wars, there just seems to be that added X factor that's missing. While the score gets the job done, we still don't get those over-the-top, grandiose fanfares and hits that will leave a lasting impression like the John Williams Star Wars scores have done. The Rogue One theme, or fanfare, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't do much, and overall it just feels like a good enough score, but nothing too memorable. There is one brilliant sequence that I really enjoyed that reminded me of another film that he scored, but I'll get to that in the spoiler section. In the news leading up to this film's release, we found out that Giacchino was actually a last-minute replacement for the original composer, Alexander Desplat, and did not have much time to complete his work. So while that certainly does play a role, it doesn't count as an excuse. This film is paced relatively well, although some people might find the first act to be a little too quick and the second act to be a little too slow. In the first act, we're taken to several different locations and given our character introductions. For me, it does a good job of quickly setting up everything we need to know about the plot without relying too much on exposition. The second act slows down a bit for the sake of that exposition, but it's worth it, as it actually helps our understanding of the events of A New Hope. More on that in the spoilers. Aside from a specific sequence involving Bodhi, I think that the second act really showcases some good scenes from Felicity Jones and Mads Mikkelsen. As far as Forrest Whitaker's portrayal of Saw Gerrera goes, it's a mixed bag. It was nice seeing a character from the animated Clone Wars series come to life in a live-action film, but to me, he just didn't do very much. And Whitaker's performance doesn't quite live up to the amazing work we've come to know him for throughout his career. By the time we get to the third act, we get the war film that we were promised. Leading up to the film's release, we were told that this movie would put the war in Star Wars, and I'm happy to say that the third act delivers in that regard. It's gritty, dark, and the ending sets up the events to A New Hope to near perfection. Speaking of the ending, the finale of this movie is one of the best pieces of fan service I've ever seen. Well worth the wait. Without giving too much away, I'll just say that this ending, and the film in general, gives us something that we didn't even know we needed, which is a great thing to see in today's modern cinema. Overall, I give this film a 9.5 out of 11. Seems kinda weird, but hey, the numbers really don't mean anything anyway. From the scope of this film to the action sequences, the production design, CGI, cinematography, fan service, to the diversity, both with respect to the actors and to the various species depicted in the film, it was an overall enjoyable experience. The film's runtime is 2 hours and 13 minutes, but it's a pretty good ride, so you don't really notice it too much. Probably the best thing about this movie is that it makes A New Hope that much better and adds to the Star Wars universe overall. This movie was marketed as a standalone film, separate from the episodes of the saga, but in reality, it functions just like another episode in that it actually fits right into the events of the main story of the saga. This film is rated PG-13, but I think it's something that the entire family can enjoy, and definitely a good pick for the holiday season. Now, in this section, I'll go into some spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, I suggest that you come back to check out this section after you've seen it. Or, if you're like me and you actually like your movies spoiled, continue on as we take a look at some of the things that stood out. Probably the most important thing that this film does is that it ties directly into the events of A New Hope and fills in one of the biggest plot holes of that film. For almost 40 years, we sat and wondered how a technological terror such as the Death Star could be taken out by a farm boy firing proton torpedoes into a 2-meter wide opening. In Rogue One, we find out that Galen Erso had actually incorporated this design flaw on purpose as the ultimate middle finger to the Empire. Galen knows that the Death Star will eventually be completed with or without his help, so he reluctantly makes the choice to join the research team in designing the super laser for the Death Star, the delay of which is responsible for over a decade's worth of setbacks. As Galen says in his message to Jyn, he's placed a weakness deep within the system, a flaw so small and powerful that they will never find it. He relies on the hubris of Tarkin, Krennic, and the Empire to overlook this crucial detail in their never-ending quest for power, and his gambit ultimately pays off. So let's talk about the good and bad about the CGI and cinematography of this film. For the most part, this is some of the best CGI we've seen in a Star Wars film. This is thanks in part to the use of practical effects, props, costumes, and sets that were lifelike and have what the production team called a lived-in look. Just about everything looks and feels real, as opposed to parts of the prequel trilogy that were filmed in front of a blue or green screen. The space battles look amazing, and it's all done without adding a ton of clutter like we saw in Independence Day Resurgence. To add to this, the cinematography is excellent. It gives you a real sense of scope, and all the locations feel organic and believable. From the characters to the vehicles and spacecraft, everything looks like it's really there and scaled properly. Movement is natural and the physics just look right. There are, however, 2 instances where fans might get a little uncomfortable with the CGI, and that is the scenes involving Tarkin and Princess Leia, as well as that tentacle-looking thing, which seemed to not add anything to the plot and was there just so that they could say that the movie had its required monster, as all Star Wars films do. You have to commend this film for daring to push the envelope with trying something new, so I can forgive the CGI Tarkin and Leia. It's like how The Empire Strikes Back was revolutionary in using stop motion and optical compositing on white backgrounds during the Battle of Hoth, something that had never been tried before. Were there some inconsistencies? Yes, but they're forgivable. I feel the same way about Tarkin and Leia, especially the scenes with Tarkin, simply because there were so many of them, as Tarkin actually played a big role in this film. It seemed to me like the scenes did get a little better as the movie went on, but the biggest thing I noticed was the herky-jerky body motion. It just didn't seem like natural human movement for me. That was a little more noticeable than the almost plasticky look on Tarkin. I suspect that by the time we get the DVD and Blu-ray release, they'll have gone in and touched up these nuances a little more. Even if they don't, I'm sure we'll get a special edition 20 years down the road that will undoubtedly fix everything. So all in all, I'm not worried. In a film with laser swords, telekinesis, and sound in space, I think I can suspend my disbelief enough to get over this aspect of the film that just wasn't quite right. I think this course of action is better than having different actors play Tarkin and Leia without any alterations. As for the tentacle porn, meh. Definitely a weak point in the movie, but not an exhaust port type of weak point. It'll make you go WTF though. Another thing I love was the fan service. There are so many Easter eggs in this film, such as appearances by C-3PO and R2-D2, Ponda Baba and Dr. Evazan, who were the ones that got into the altercation with Luke and Obi-Wan in A New Hope. Chopper from the animated series Rebels can be seen, and there's also a reference to General Syndulla over the intercom on the Rebel base, most likely referring to Hera Syndulla, also from Rebels, and of course Bail Organa and the reference to Obi-Wan by Mon Mothma. There are a bunch of other references and callbacks in Rogue One, which only adds to its replay value, but one of my favorites involved using footage from A New Hope to include Gold Leader and Red Leader in the Battle of Scarif. In addition, we see Red 5 get shot down, which opens the door for Luke to assume that call sign in A New Hope. It was a nice little nod. There's one part that I want to mention that I haven't heard talked about much. During the space battle, an X-Wing takes out a Star Destroyer's shield generator. For the casual fan, this is just eye candy, but those of you that recall Return of the Jedi will remember just how crucial this is, and it explains later in the Scarif space battle when the Y-Wings are about to hit that opening, as they stated. It's something small, but one of those attention to detail things that I like so much. We also get to see the Ghost from Star Wars Rebels, and in one quick scene you can even see the Ghost take out a TIE fighter. Again, a nice little nod for the fans that doesn't feel shoehorned in. There's also one other huge Easter egg that I haven't seen many people notice. If you go back and watch A New Hope, and specifically look at the Death Star firing sequence, you might be able to catch a shot-for-shot remake when the Death Star fires on Scarif. Everything was meticulously recreated, right down to the console buttons and where you can faintly hear the gunner saying, "Commence primary ignition." The only change is that director Gareth Edwards uses sweeping camera angles, whereas George Lucas opted to keep the angles static and not moving. For me, this, along with the production team recreating Darth Vader's suit just how it was in A New Hope, really showed me the care that they put into this, and that has to count for a lot, especially these days. During the final sequence of the movie, much of the main audio dies down and we're treated to a calm, serene passage by Giacchino's score. It reminded me a lot of the Star Trek reboot of 2009 when the characters are escaping the ill-fated Kelvin as it heads on a collision course to ram the enemy ship while James Kirk is being born. That track is called Labor of Love, and the sequence in Rogue One where we see the two Star Destroyers collide into the shield gate reminds me of that. If you want, go check out Star Trek and note the similarities. This movie doesn't just do fan service for the sake of it, but rather does it with extreme attention to detail, thus making it a genuine and real effort. As I said earlier, the events of this movie literally lead right into A New Hope, such that you can watch that film right after Rogue One and really see the continuity, from the motifs in the music to the uniforms and clothing of Captain Antilles, Leia, and the crew of the Tantive 4. If you're not looking for it, I can see where you might not get the most out of this film, but to me, it's those little things that make it much more worthy. Now on to the characters, who all die. Chris Stuckman in his review didn't care too much for the character development. He thought that we didn't get to really know them very well. I've left a link below to his review, so when you get a chance, go check out what he has to say. For me, I have to disagree a little. This is a war movie, so the focus is not so much on the characters as it is the mission. This movie is about the Death Star plans and how so many people gave their lives to retrieve them. Given that every major character dies in this film, let's look at the psychology of that. The more we know about a character, the more it hurts when they die. Look at TV shows like Game of Thrones, The Wire, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, ER, and The Walking Dead, or films such as the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings series. When our beloved characters meet their fate, they take a piece of us with them. Look at films such as The Green Mile, The Lion King, Bambi, Marley and Me, and My Girl. Typically we just have one super sad, gut-wrenching death, because psychologically, that's all we can handle. Too much of it, and it takes us out of the experience, if nothing else, for sheer heartbreak. The more we get to know a character, the more it rips out our soul when they die. So in Rogue One, I particularly don't mind not knowing too much about everyone. We know that they're to complete the mission, and that's the most important part. In any military, the emphasis is on the mission. The U.S. Army's warrior ethos even states, "I will always place the mission first." So with that in mind, this is a war movie, and it's good to know about each character's personality, quirks, and chemistry with the team, but it's not required to really know their backstory. It reminds me a lot of Saving Private Ryan. We learn just enough about the characters to care when they die, but not too much that their deaths linger with us too long. We know how the characters are, but not who they are. And in the war movie, where the mission takes precedence over everything else, I'm okay with that. Finally, let's talk about Vader. Everything was just right. He didn't get a lot of screen time, but he didn't need it, because this story wasn't about him. That said, the scenes we do get are amazing. We get to see his castle on Mustafar, and the whole interchange between him and Krennic was masterfully done. We see a glimpse of him in his bacta tank, but not so much that it peels away the mystique of Vader. If anything, it adds to it because now we see another side of him that we previously didn't know about before. When the doors open and he enters, I love the way the director framed the shadow against the wall in front of Krennic, showing just how much larger than life he is. As for Vader's pun when he's force choking Krennic, I didn't mind that one bit. Some people think it was out of character for him, but when thinking about lines such as,
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
and
Apology accepted, Captain Nida.
I don't mind the quote like, be careful not to choke on your aspirations. The one thing I did notice though was in James Earl Jones's performance. While it was where it needed to be, there was just a little bit of that arrogance and poshness missing from it. Not enough to take me away from the story, but noticeable nonetheless. Besides that, everyone's favorite scene will be the one in which we saw Vader truly unleashed for the first time on film. In previous films, he seems more like an old man in a suit, lumbering and slow. But in Rogue One, we see classic Vader, more man than machine, in all his glory and mastery of the Force. If you've gotten this far into the review, then you've heard and seen all there is to say about Vader's badass moment. But it's great to see that we were able to finally get something like this set to film. Overall, if you are a fan of Star Wars, then you really can't ask for anything more than that. This really was a scene that we didn't even know we needed, but now that it's here, it's made a great movie even better. So, there you have it. I had a good time seeing this film, and upon a second viewing, it got even better knowing what to look for. There's so much more to this film that I haven't even gotten around to mentioning, which just goes to show the amount of detail in it. How about you? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Feel free to comment down below. Does it feel like Star Wars to you? And how do you think it measures up against the 7 saga films? To me, I would rank it second, just under The Empire Strikes Back. And I think it was better than The Force Awakens. As always, feel free to like and subscribe as well, and who knows, maybe I'll do more of these movie reviews in the future. Until then, thanks for watching. Peace.